She poured coffee with steady hands, never spilling a drop. Her uniform was always clean, her smile always gentle. The customers at Miller's Cafe knew her simply as Sarah, the new waitress who started 3 months ago. She took orders without writing them down, remembered how everyone liked their coffee, and never forgot to ask about their families. To them, she was just another small-town server making minimum wage and tips. What they didn't know was that those same steady hands had once controlled aircraft through mountain storms. The same calm voice that asked, "Would you like cream with that?" had once guided rescue helicopters through impossible weather to save lives hanging by threads on cliff faces. Sarah Miller wasn't just a waitress. She was a ghost from the sky. Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we begin this powerful tale of hidden courage and unexpected heroism, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe that real heroes often hide in plain sight, hit that subscribe button. These stories need to be told. Chapter 1. The Morning Routine. The alarm rang at 5 a.m., same as always. Sarah rolled out of bed without hitting snooze, her feet finding the cold wooden floor of her small apartment above the hardware store. She moved through her morning routine with military precision. Shower, coffee, toast with jam, weather check on her phone. Outside, Pine Ridge was waking up slowly. The mountain town of 3,000 people didn't rush for anything except emergencies. Sarah liked it that way. No air traffic control towers, no radio chatter, no urgent calls for immediate takeoff. Just the sound of birds and the distant rumble of logging trucks heading up the mountain roads. She walked the 3 blocks to Miller's Cafe in the pre-dawn quiet. Her footsteps echoed off the empty sidewalks. The cafe wasn't related to her last name. It was just coincidence, the kind of small irony that made her smile sadly when she first saw the "Help Wanted" sign in the window 6 months ago. Tom Rodriguez, the owner, was already inside preparing the morning bake. He was a kind man in his 60s who had run the cafe for 20 years. He never asked too many questions about where his employees came from, which was exactly what Sarah needed. "Morning, Sarah," he called from behind the counter. "You're early again." "Morning, Tom. Couldn't sleep." It wasn't entirely true. She could sleep, but her dreams were filled with the sound of rotor blades and radio static, voices calling for help that she could no longer answer. She tied her apron around her waist and began setting up the dining room. Chairs down from tables, salt and pepper shakers aligned, napkin dispensers filled. Simple tasks that kept her hands busy and her mind quiet. The first customers arrived at 6:30. Frank Morrison, the hardware store owner, ordered his usual black coffee and blueberry muffin. He read the local newspaper and complained about the weather, same as every morning. Sarah listened with genuine interest, asking about his grandchildren and his wife's garden. Next came Linda Chen, the elementary school principal. Coffee with cream, no sugar, and a breakfast sandwich to go. She always looked tired during the school year, carrying the weight of 200 children's education on her shoulders. "How's the new teacher working out?" Sarah asked as she prepared Linda's order. "Jenny? She's wonderful with the kids, but I worry she's taking on too much. She volunteers for everything." Linda shook her head. "Reminds me of someone else I know." Sarah handed over the coffee with a smile. "Sometimes people need to stay busy." By 8 a.m., the cafe was full of the usual morning crowd. Retired folks reading newspapers, construction workers grabbing coffee before heading to job sites, mothers with young children before school started. Sarah moved between tables with practiced ease, refilling cups, taking orders, making small talk. She noticed everything. The way Mrs. Patterson favored her left leg when she walked, probably arthritis acting up. How young Billy Jenkins had a new bruise on his arm, likely from playing too rough with his older brothers, nothing serious. The stress lines around Janet Murphy's eyes, Her husband was still looking for work after the lumber mill closed. These details mattered to Sarah. In her previous life, noticing small changes could mean the difference between life and death. Old habits die hard. Around 10 a.m., the morning rush ended. Sarah wiped down tables and restocked supplies while Tom worked on lunch preparations. This was her favorite time of day. Quiet, peaceful, ordinary. "You know," Tom said, chopping vegetables for soup, "you're the best waitress I've ever had. Never seen anyone read customers like you do." Sarah paused in her cleaning. "Just paying attention. It's more than that. You move like someone who's used to being responsible for other people." She didn't answer, just continued wiping the same table for the third time. Tom noticed her silence. He had learned over the months that Sarah didn't talk about her past. No family photos in her apartment, no stories about where she came from, no contact with relatives. She paid her rent in cash, drove an old pickup truck with out-of-state plates, and kept to herself outside of work. But she was reliable, honest, and the customers loved her. That was enough for Tom. "I'm going to the bank," he said, untying his apron. "Can you handle things here?" "Of course." The afternoon passed quietly. A few tourists stopped in for coffee and directions to the hiking trails. Sarah served them with the same gentle efficiency she showed everyone, but she noticed how they looked at the mountains with excitement and wonder. She used to feel that way about the sky. At 3 p.m., her shift ended. Sarah hung up her apron and walked home through the town center. Pine Ridge was the kind of place where people knew each other's names, where kids could ride bikes without helmets, where doors were rarely locked. She had chosen this place specifically because it was as far from her old life as possible. No airports nearby, no helicopter landing pads, no emergency services that might need someone with her particular skills. In her apartment, Sarah made dinner and sat by the window overlooking Main Street. She watched people going about their evening routines, parents picking up children from school, teenagers hanging out by the pharmacy, elderly couples taking slow walks. It was peaceful, safe, ordinary, everything she thought she wanted, but sometimes, usually in the quiet moments like this, she would hear it. The faint sound of aircraft engines in the distance, probably just a commercial jet flying overhead. Her muscles would tense automatically. Her ears would strain to identify the engine type. Her eyes would scan the sky. Then she would remember where she was and why she was there, and the sound would fade into background noise. Sarah Miller had been hiding in plain sight for 3 years now. She had a job, a place to live, and neighbors who treated her with kindness. She should have been content. But contentment and peace were two different things. And peace, she was learning, was much harder to find than she had imagined. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Sarah closed her curtains and prepared for another quiet evening. Tomorrow would bring another day of coffee service and small talk, another day of being invisible. She had no idea that everything was about to change. Chapter 2. The Storm Builds. Tuesday started like any other day. Sarah arrived at the cafe before dawn, helped Tom with the morning setup, and greeted the regular customers with her usual warm efficiency. The weather report mentioned possible thunderstorms later in the week, but that was normal for late summer in the mountains. What wasn't normal was the tension she noticed in some of the customers' faces. Dave Martinez, who worked for the Forest Service, came in earlier than usual and ordered coffee to go. His radio crackled with updates about fire danger levels and weather conditions. Sarah's trained ear picked up the coded language of emergency preparedness. "Everything okay in the mountains?" she asked as she handed him his coffee. Dave paused, studying her face. Most people in town asked questions out of polite curiosity. But there was something different in Sarah's tone. a professional interest that he couldn't quite place. Dry conditions, he said finally. One lightning strike in the wrong place, and we could have problems. Sarah nodded, filing the information away automatically. Wind patterns, humidity levels, terrain challenges. Her mind cataloged the factors without conscious thought. The morning passed with an underlying current of unease. The older residents remembered bad fire years when smoke filled the valley and evacuations were necessary. They spoke in quiet voices about emergency plans and go bags. Around noon, the first reports came in over the radio in the hardware store next door. Frank Morrison had it turned up loud enough for half the street to hear. Small grass fire reported on Lookout Ridge. Fire department responding. Sarah felt her pulse quicken slightly, but she continued taking lunch orders as if nothing had changed. Grass fires were common in dry weather. Usually, they were contained quickly. But by 2 p.m., the radio reports were less optimistic. Fire has jumped the creek bed, requesting additional resources from county. By 3 p.m., when Sarah's shift normally ended, she could see smoke in the distance. A thin gray line rising from the mountains to the east, barely visible against the afternoon sky. "You should go home," Tom said, but his voice lacked conviction. The cafe was busier than usual as people came in for information and coffee, using it as an unofficial community center. "I'll stay until you close," Sarah replied. "People might need the coffee." What she didn't say was that she felt more alert than she had in months. The familiar rhythm of emergency response was awakening something inside her that she had tried to bury. Throughout the afternoon, updates came in regular intervals. The fire was growing. Evacuations were being considered for some of the remote mountain properties. The main road to the east was already closed to civilian traffic. Sarah listened to every report while continuing to serve customers. She noticed which families had relatives in the affected areas, which people were making phone calls to check on friends, which conversations were starting to show signs of real worry. Around 6 p.m., a Forest Service truck pulled up outside the cafe. Dave Martinez came in, his uniform dusty and his face grim. "Coffee to go," he said. "Make it strong." "How bad is it?" Sarah asked, already pouring. Dave looked around the cafe, noting the customers trying to listen without appearing obvious. He lowered his voice. "Worse than we thought. Wind picked up about an hour ago, and it's pushing the fire toward Henderson Valley. We've got maybe a dozen families up there, and the main road is already cut off." Sarah's hand paused slightly as she handed him the coffee. Henderson Valley was accessible by only one mountain road, a winding path that would be dangerous even in good conditions. If the fire was moving that direction. "Evacuation?" she asked. "We're trying. But some folks up there are stubborn, think they can wait it out." Dave shook his head. "Problem is, if this fire keeps growing, we won't be able to get vehicles up that road much longer." He paid for his coffee and hurried back to his truck. Sarah watched him drive away, her mind automatically calculating distances, wind patterns, escape routes. "Stop it," she told herself. "That's not your job anymore." But as the evening progressed and the smoke became more visible, Sarah found it harder to push away the professional instincts that had guided her for 15 years. Around 8 p.m., just as Tom was preparing to close the cafe, the emergency siren sounded from the fire station. Long, urgent blasts that echoed off the mountains and sent a chill through everyone who heard them. People rushed outside to see what was happening. Sarah followed, standing in the doorway of the cafe as neighbors gathered in small groups, pointing at the growing column of smoke. "Sarah!" Linda Chen called from across the street. She was standing with several other women, all looking worried. "You worked in emergency services before, didn't you?" The question hit Sarah like a cold wind. She had never told anyone in Pine Ridge about her background. She had been careful, so careful, to seem like just another small-town waitress with a quiet past. What makes you think that? She asked, keeping her voice level. The way you handle crisis situations. Remember when old Mr. Peterson had his heart attack in the cafe? You knew exactly what to do, how to keep him calm until the ambulance arrived. And you understand all those radio codes when the emergency services are talking. Several people had turned to listen to the conversation. Sarah felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't experienced since arriving in Pine Ridge. I just pay attention, she said, the same response she always gave. But Linda wasn't buying it this time. Sarah, if you have experience that could help people, now might be the time to speak up. Before Sarah could respond, Dave Martinez's truck came speeding down Main Street, lights flashing. He pulled up in front of the cafe and jumped out, looking around the gathered crowd until his eyes found Sarah. I need to talk to you, he said urgently. Sarah's stomach dropped. About what? About the helicopter pilot we need, and why I think you might know something about flying. The crowd went silent. Sarah could feel every eye on her, waiting for her response. In that moment, she realized her carefully constructed new life was about to crumble, whether she wanted it to or not. The mountains were on fire, people were in danger, and her secret was no longer safe. Chapter 3. The Past Revealed. Dave Martinez led Sarah away from the crowd to the parking area behind the cafe where they could speak privately. Tom followed, concern written across his face. I'm going to ask you something, Dave said, and I need you to be straight with me. Lives might depend on it. Sarah's mouth went dry. I'm listening. We've got a family trapped in Henderson Valley. The Johnsons, Mike, his wife Carol, and their 2 kids. Their truck broke down this morning, and now the fire has cut off the only road out. We can't get ground vehicles through anymore. What about helicopters? Sarah asked automatically, then immediately regretted the question. It revealed too much knowledge. Dave noticed. That's exactly what I was thinking. But here's the problem. Our nearest helicopter rescue unit is 2 hours away, dealing with evacuations on the other side of the county. And weather's closing in. They might not be able to fly by the time they get here. Sarah said nothing, but her mind was already working. 2 hours was too long if the fire was moving fast, and mountain weather could change in minutes, making helicopter operations impossible. But, Dave continued, there's an old rescue helicopter sitting in a hangar about 30 miles from here. Belongs to a private company that used to do mountain rescue operations. Owner says it's in good condition, but he doesn't have a pilot available. Tom stepped forward. Dave, what does this have to do with Sarah? Dave studied Sarah's face carefully. Because 3 months ago, when Jenny Morrison's little boy fell into Miller's Creek, Sarah knew exactly how to organize a search pattern. She positioned volunteers in specific locations, coordinated timing, used hand signals that looked an awful lot like aircraft marshalling procedures. Sarah felt her heart racing. She had been careful that day, but apparently not careful enough. And, Dave continued, when Mr. Peterson had his heart attack, she didn't just know first aid. She knew trauma medicine, field medicine, the kind you learn when you're working in situations where hospitals are hours away. Tom was staring at Sarah now, pieces clicking together in his mind. Sarah, what is he talking about? There's more, Dave said. Last month, when that storm knocked out power lines, you were the one who suggested the safest landing zone for the repair helicopter. You didn't guess where it should go. You knew. You understood rotor wash, power lines, terrain challenges. Sarah closed her eyes. After 3 years of hiding, her professional knowledge had betrayed her in small moments of crisis. She had tried to help without revealing herself, but to someone trained to notice details, the signs were obvious. So I'll ask you directly, Dave said. Are you a pilot? The silence stretched between them. Sarah could hear the distant sound of sirens, the radio chatter from Dave's truck, the worried voices of people still gathered on Main Street. Finally, she opened her eyes and looked at Dave. I was a pilot. Was. I don't fly anymore. But you could, Dave pressed. If you had to, you could fly that helicopter. Sarah's hands began to tremble slightly. Dave, you don't understand. I understand that there's a family with 2 young children trapped in a valley that's about to be surrounded by fire, he interrupted. I understand that you might be the only person within 50 miles who can get them out alive. Tom put a hand on Sarah's shoulder. Sarah, what aren't you telling us? She looked at both men, then at the smoke rising from the mountains. In her mind, she could see the terrain around Henderson Valley, the narrow approach routes, the wind patterns that would affect a helicopter in that kind of environment. She could also see the faces of the people she hadn't been able to save. I was a search and rescue pilot for 15 years, she said quietly. Mountain rescue, emergency medical evacuations, disaster response. I flew in conditions that most pilots wouldn't attempt. Dave leaned forward. Then you can help. I also crashed, Sarah cut him off. 3 years ago. A medical evacuation in a snowstorm. Weather turned faster than predicted and I lost control. My co-pilot died. The patient died. I was the only one who walked away. The admission hung in the air like the smoke drifting down from the mountains. Tom squeezed her shoulder gently. Sarah, I'm so sorry. After the investigation, they cleared me of fault. Equipment failure, they said. Impossible conditions. But I knew better. I made a choice to fly when I should have stayed grounded. And people died because of it. Dave's expression softened, but his voice remained urgent. Sarah, I understand why you stopped flying. But right now, there are people in danger, and you think I should risk killing more of them? I think you're the best chance they have. Sarah turned away, looking up at the mountains where the smoke was growing thicker. Somewhere up there, a family was trapped, probably scared, possibly injured. Children who needed someone to bring them home safely. What if I freeze up? She asked. What if I can't do it anymore? What if you can? Dave replied. Tom stepped closer. Sarah, I've watched you handle every crisis that's come through this town with more skill and calmness than anyone I've ever seen. If you were my daughter, trapped up there, I'd want you coming to get her. Sarah felt tears stinging her eyes. For 3 years, she had told herself that walking away from flying was the right choice, that serving coffee and living quietly was her penance for the lives lost. But now, faced with the possibility of more lives at stake, she wasn't sure anymore. Tell me about the helicopter, she said finally. Dave's face showed relief. Bell UH-1H, Vietnam-era Huey, but completely refurbished. The owner uses it for tourist flights and occasional cargo runs. He says it's in perfect mechanical condition. Sarah nodded. She knew the aircraft well. Reliable, capable of handling rough conditions, good for mountain work. If she had to fly again, a Huey was a reasonable choice. Weather? Winds are increasing, but still within safe limits for now. Visibility is good, except near the fire. But all of that could change quickly. Ground support? I can coordinate radio communications and have emergency crews standing by. The landing zone near the Johnsons' location is clear, according to their last radio contact. Sarah took a deep breath. Every part of her professional training said this was a manageable mission. Challenging, but within acceptable risk parameters. The only unknown variable was herself. If I do this, she said slowly, and something goes wrong, you need to understand that I'm not the pilot I used to be. I haven't flown in 3 years. My confidence is gone. But your skills aren't, Dave said. Skills like yours don't disappear? How do you know? Dave smiled grimly. Because if they did, you wouldn't be so scared right now. Fear means you understand the risks, and understanding risks is what kept you alive for 15 years. Sarah looked at Tom, who nodded encouragingly. Then she looked back at the mountains, where the smoke was growing darker and the wind was starting to pick up. Somewhere in those mountains, people were waiting for help that might not come in time, unless she chose to become who she used to be. Chapter 4. Return to the Sky. The drive to the helicopter hangar took 20 minutes through winding mountain roads. Dave led the way in his Forest Service truck, with Sarah following in her pickup. Tom had insisted on coming along, claiming someone needed to keep an eye on things, but Sarah suspected he was more worried about her than the logistics. The hangar sat in a small private airfield that Sarah had noticed before but never visited. She had deliberately avoided airports and aircraft facilities since arriving in Pine Ridge, the same way a recovering alcoholic avoids bars. But as they pulled up to the metal building, Sarah felt something stirring inside her that wasn't fear. It was recognition. The smell of aviation fuel, the sound of wind across the runway, the sight of aircraft tie-downs and windsocks. This was her world, the environment where she had once felt most capable and alive. The hangar owner, Bill Patterson, was waiting for them. He was a man in his 70s with pilot's hands and aircraft grease under his fingernails. He looked Sarah up and down skeptically. "You're the pilot Dave found?" he asked. "I am." "You look like a waitress." Sarah smiled despite her nerves. "I've been practicing." Bill led them into the hangar, where the helicopter sat under bright fluorescent lights. It was a beautiful machine, painted in emergency orange with white striping. Sarah's trained eye immediately began conducting a visual inspection. Rotor blades secure, landing gear in good condition, no obvious fluid leaks. "She's a 1974 UH-1H, Bill said with obvious pride. "Vietnam vet, just like me. I've put about $50,000 into refurbishing her over the past 5 years. New engine, updated avionics, everything certified." Sarah walked around the aircraft, her movements becoming more confident with each step. This was familiar territory, a language she spoke fluently even after 3 years of silence. "Flight hours on the new engine?" she asked. 235. Just had the 100-hour inspection last month." "Weather radar?" "Updated GPS system with weather overlay. Radio package includes emergency frequencies and Forest Service channels." Sarah nodded, continuing her inspection. The aircraft was well maintained, professionally restored. If she had to fly again, this was the kind of machine that wouldn't let her down mechanically. "When's the last time you flew?" Bill asked. 3 years ago." Bill whistled low. "That's a long break. What kind of time do you have?" "About 4,000 hours. 15 years of mountain rescue and emergency medical services." 4,000? Bill's skepticism disappeared. "Hell, you've got more time in helicopters than I've got in fixed wing. What happened? Why'd you stop?" Sarah paused in her inspection. "I crashed." The hangar went silent except for the distant sound of sirens and radio chatter from outside. "Anyone hurt?" Bill asked quietly. 2 people died." Bill nodded slowly. In aviation, that explanation was enough. Crashes happened, sometimes with fatal consequences, and pilots dealt with the aftermath in different ways. Some flew again immediately, others never flew again. Both responses were understood and respected. "Well," Bill said finally, "if you're ready to get back in the saddle, she's all yours. Fuel tanks are full, and I've got a flight helmet that should fit." Sarah looked at Dave, who was monitoring radio traffic from his handheld unit. "What's the current situation?" "Fire's moving faster than expected," Dave replied. "Johnson family is still trapped, but they're okay for now. However, Weather's starting to deteriorate. We've got maybe a 2-hour window before conditions become too dangerous for flight operations. Sarah felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Time pressure, weather factors, lives at stake. It was exactly the kind of situation she had handled dozens of times before. The only difference was that she was no longer sure she could handle it now. "I need a few minutes to familiarize myself with the aircraft," she said. Bill handed her a flight helmet and headset. "Take all the time you need." Sarah climbed into the pilot's seat, and immediately her body remembered. Her hands found the controls automatically. Her feet positioned themselves on the anti-torque pedals. Her eyes scanned the instrument panel in the systematic pattern she had used for 15 years. But something was different. Her breathing was faster than it should be. Her palms were sweating, and she could hear her heart beating in her ears. The confidence that had once defined her as a pilot was gone, replaced by doubt and the memory of failure. She closed her eyes and tried to center herself. Focus on the mission, not the fear. Focus on the people who needed help, not the people she couldn't save. When she opened her eyes, Tom was standing beside the aircraft. "You okay?" he asked. "Terrified," she admitted. "Good. That means you're taking this seriously." Sarah managed a small smile. "When did you become an expert on aviation psychology?" "About the same time I figured out my waitress was really a hero in hiding." "I'm not a hero, Tom. Heroes don't get people killed." Tom was quiet for a moment, then said, "Sarah, in the 3 months you've worked for me, I've watched you help people every single day. Maybe not in dramatic ways, but in ways that mattered. You remembered that Mrs. Chen was diabetic and needed her coffee prepared a certain way. You noticed when young Billy Jenkins was being bullied and quietly talked to his mother. You organized the whole town when we needed to help the Martinez family after their house fire. That's just being a decent person. No, that's being someone who pays attention to other people's needs and does something about it. That's exactly the kind of person I'd want flying rescue missions." Sarah looked at the controls in front of her, then at Dave, who was pacing near the hangar door with his radio. "Dave," she called, "what's the exact location of the Johnson family?" Dave jogged over with a map. "Henderson Valley, about 15 miles northeast of here. They're at the old mining camp near the creek. I can guide you there by radio." Sarah studied the map, her pilot's mind automatically calculating flight time, fuel consumption, and approach routes. The location was challenging. A narrow valley with steep sides and limited maneuvering room. In good conditions, it would be a routine flight. But with smoke, changing weather, and her own rust, it would be anything but routine. "What about the fire's current position?" she asked. "About 3 miles south of their location and moving north. We estimate they have maybe 90 minutes before they'll be in immediate danger." 90 minutes. Enough time if everything went perfectly. But in mountain flying, nothing ever went perfectly. Sarah took a deep breath and made her decision. "Bill, can you show me the startup procedures for this specific aircraft?" Bill grinned. "Now you're talking. Let's get this bird in the air." As Sarah began the pre-flight checklist, she felt the familiar rhythm of aviation procedures taking over. Radio checks, engine parameters, flight control movements. Each step was automatic, muscle memory that 3 years of absence hadn't erased. But underneath the professional competence, fear remained. Fear of making another mistake, fear of letting people down, fear of proving that she really had lost the skills that once defined her. Outside the hangar, the smoke was getting thicker, and the wind was picking up. Time was running out, and ready or not, Sarah Miller was about to discover if she was still the pilot she used to be. Chapter 5. Into the Fire. The helicopter's engine spooled up with a familiar whine that Sarah felt in her bones. She ran through the startup checklist methodically. each step bringing back muscle memory from thousands of hours in the cockpit. But her hands were shaking slightly, and she had to concentrate on keeping her breathing steady. "Engine parameters normal," she reported to Dave, who was monitoring from the ground. "Radio check." "Loud and clear," Dave responded through the headset. "Weather update, winds are 15 knots, gusting to 20. Visibility is good except near the fire zone." Sarah nodded, looking out at the smoke plume that was now clearly visible from the airfield. The fire had grown significantly even in the 30 minutes they'd been preparing for takeoff. "Johnson family status?" she asked. "Still in contact. They've moved to higher ground near the old mine buildings. Smoke is getting heavy in their area, but they're not in immediate danger yet." Sarah took a deep breath and gripped the collective control. This was it. The moment she either proved she could still fly or confirmed her worst fears about losing her abilities. "Pine Ridge Base, this is Rescue 1, requesting clearance for takeoff," she said into the radio, using the call sign Dave had assigned. "Rescue 1, you are cleared for takeoff. Good luck up there." Sarah pulled up on the collective, and the helicopter lifted smoothly off the ground. The sensation of flight returned immediately. The feeling of the aircraft responding to her inputs, the subtle vibrations that told her everything about the engine and rotor system performance. For a moment, her fear receded. This was what she had been born to do. She climbed to 800 feet and turned northeast toward Henderson Valley. The landscape below was familiar from her drives around Pine Ridge, but seeing it from the air brought back the perspective she had missed for 3 years. Every ridge, every canyon, every potential landing zone was visible and cataloged automatically by her pilot's brain. "Rescue 1, this is Pine Ridge Base." Dave's voice crackled through the headset. "Fire has jumped the southern ridge. Recommend you approach from the west to avoid the worst of the smoke." "Copy, approaching from the west," Sarah replied, adjusting her flight path. As they flew deeper into the mountains, the smoke became more visible. Thick gray columns rising from multiple points, creating a haze that reduced visibility and made navigation more challenging. Sarah found herself relying more on GPS and less on visual landmarks. 5 minutes out from the LZ, she reported. "Roger. Johnson family is standing by with signal mirrors." Sarah began her descent into Henderson Valley and immediately felt the challenge of the terrain. The valley was narrow, with steep walls on both sides that created unpredictable wind patterns. She had to constantly adjust her flight controls to compensate for downdrafts and crosswinds. This was exactly the kind of flying that had led to her crash 3 years ago. Her hands began to sweat inside her flight gloves. The memory of that day came flooding back. The deteriorating weather, the difficult approach, the moment when she realized she was losing control of the aircraft. "Rescue 1, are you okay up there?" Dave's voice sounded concerned. Sarah realized she had stopped reporting her position. "Sorry, Pine Ridge Base. Just dealing with some turbulence." But it wasn't turbulence that was affecting her flying. It was fear. The kind of paralyzing doubt that could turn a routine mission into a disaster. She forced herself to focus on the immediate task. Below, she could see the old mining camp and the reflection of sunlight off signal mirrors. The Johnson family was there, waiting for her to bring them to safety. "I have visual contact with survivors," she reported, her voice steadier than she felt. The landing zone was small, surrounded by trees and mining equipment. It would require a precise approach with no room for error. Sarah circled once to assess wind direction and obstacles, then set up for her final approach. As she descended toward the ground, a sudden gust of wind caught the helicopter and pushed it sideways. Sarah corrected quickly, but her heart rate spiked. She was rusty, no doubt about it. The smooth confidence she once had was gone. "Take your time," she whispered to herself, "just like you've done 1,000 times before." She touched down gently in a small clearing near the mining buildings. Through the windscreen, she could see four people running toward the helicopter: a man, a woman, and two children, the Johnson family. Sarah kept the engine running while Dave guided the family aboard. The children looked scared but excited, while the parents appeared relieved but worried about the growing smoke around them. "Everyone aboard and secure," Dave reported from the passenger compartment. "Copy. Departing the LZ," Sarah replied, pulling up on the collective. The helicopter lifted off smoothly, and Sarah turned back toward Pine Ridge. So far, so good. The family was safe, the aircraft was performing well, and the weather was still manageable. But as they climbed out of the valley, Sarah noticed something that made her stomach drop. The wind had shifted, and the fire was spreading faster than anyone had predicted. Smoke was now filling the valley they had just left, and the western approach route she had planned to use for the return flight was becoming obscured. "Pine Ridge Base, this is Rescue 1, she called on the radio. "I'm seeing heavy smoke on our planned return route, requesting alternate navigation guidance." "Copy, Rescue 1. We're tracking the fire spread here. Recommend you climb to 1,200 feet and take a more northern route back to base." Sarah acknowledged and began climbing, but the smoke was getting thicker even at the higher altitude. She switched to instrument navigation, relying on GPS and radio beacons rather than visual landmarks. In the passenger compartment, she could hear Mike Johnson talking to his family. "See, kids, this nice lady is flying us to safety. Everything's going to be okay." The trust in his voice made Sarah's chest tighten. These people were depending on her to get them home safely, just like the patients she used to transport. The weight of that responsibility felt heavier than it had 3 years ago. "Rescue 1, Pine Ridge Base," Dave's voice crackled through increased radio static. "We're getting reports of severe wind shear near your position. How are you handling up there?" As if in response to his question, the helicopter suddenly dropped 50 feet in a downdraft. Sarah fought the controls, her training taking over as she adjusted power and attitude to regain stable flight. But her passengers weren't strapped in as securely as she would have liked, and she heard one of the children cry out in fear. "Just some rough air," she announced over the intercom, trying to keep her voice calm. "Everyone okay back there?" "We're fine," Carol Johnson replied, though Sarah could hear the tension in her voice. Sarah wiped sweat from her forehead and concentrated on her flying. The combination of smoke, wind, and mountainous terrain was creating exactly the kind of challenging conditions that had led to her crash 3 years ago. The difference was that this time she was out of practice and fighting her own demons as much as the weather. Another downdraft hit the helicopter, this one stronger than the first. Sarah felt the aircraft start to develop a dangerous sink rate, and for a moment, she froze. The memory of her last crash flooded back, the loss of control, the sickening feeling of falling, the impact that killed her co-pilot and patient. "Rescue 1, respond." Dave's voice was sharp with concern. Sarah shook herself back to the present and applied power, stopping the descent just above the tree line. Her hands were shaking now, and she could feel sweat running down her back. "I'm okay," she reported, but she wasn't sure she believed it herself. "Sarah," came a quiet voice from the passenger compartment. It was Mike Johnson, who had somehow moved closer to the cockpit. "I don't know what your story is, but I can see you're fighting something up there. Whatever it is, we trust you. My kids trust you." Sarah glanced back and saw 8-year-old Emma Johnson looking at her with complete faith. The little girl wasn't afraid because she believed the pilot would keep her safe. That trust did something to Sarah. It reminded her why she had become a rescue pilot in the first place. Not for the adrenaline or the challenge, but to be the person who brought families home safely. She took a deep breath and refocused on her flying. The fear was still there, but it was manageable now. She had a job to do, and people were counting on her. Pine Ridge Base, Rescue 1, she called with renewed confidence. I'm 15 minutes out. Have medical standing by as a precaution, but everyone appears to be in good condition. Copy, Rescue 1. Emergency crews are standing by. The rest of the flight passed without major incident. Sarah navigated around the worst of the smoke and turbulence, using skills that felt rusty but still reliable. When the Pine Ridge airfield came into view, she felt a surge of relief and pride. She set the helicopter down gently near the waiting ambulance and fire trucks. As the engines spooled down, the Johnson family climbed out, all of them safe and uninjured. Mike Johnson approached the cockpit as Sarah was completing her shutdown checklist. "Thank you," he said simply. "I don't know who you are or where you came from, but you saved our lives today." Sarah removed her helmet and looked at him. "I'm just a waitress at Miller's Cafe." He smiled. "No, ma'am. You're a pilot, and a damn good one." Chapter 6. The Truth Emerges. Word of the rescue spread through Pine Ridge faster than the wildfire itself. By the time Sarah walked back into town, people were gathering outside Miller's Cafe, waiting to hear the details. The local newspaper editor was there with his camera, the mayor was making phone calls, and it seemed like half the town wanted to shake her hand. Sarah felt overwhelmed. For 3 years, she had been invisible. Just another small-town resident going about her quiet business. Now she was the center of attention, and it made her deeply uncomfortable. "There she is," someone called out as she approached the cafe. The crowd turned toward her, and Sarah felt the weight of dozens of stares. Tom pushed through the group and put his arm around her shoulders. "Give her some space, folks. She's had a long day." But the questions came anyway, voices overlapping in excitement and curiosity. "Sarah, is it true you're a helicopter pilot? How long have you been living here? Why didn't you tell anyone about your background? Will you help with more rescues?" Sarah raised her hand for quiet. The crowd settled down, waiting for her to speak. "The Johnson family is safe," she said simply. "That's what matters." "But Sarah," called Linda Chen from the front of the group, "people want to know about you. We've been living next to a hero for months without knowing it." Sarah shook her head. "I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who used to have a different job." Frank Morrison, the hardware store owner, stepped forward. "Different job? Lady, you saved 4 lives today. If that's not heroic, I don't know what is." Tom guided Sarah toward the cafe door. "Why don't we go inside and let Sarah get cleaned up? She can answer questions later if she wants to." But as they reached the door, a new voice spoke up from the back of the crowd. "Actually, I think people deserve to know the whole story." Everyone turned to see a man in his 50s wearing a pilot's jacket and holding a tablet computer. Sarah's face went pale when she saw him. "Hello, Sarah," the man said, walking through the crowd. "It's been a long time." "Who are you?" Tom asked, positioning himself protectively near Sarah. The man smiled, but it wasn't entirely friendly. "My name is Robert Chen. I'm Linda's brother, actually. I'm also a reporter for Aviation Weekly magazine, and Sarah Miller here is quite famous in our little world." Sarah felt her stomach drop. She had hoped her past would stay buried, but apparently that wasn't going to be possible. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said quietly. Robert pulled up something on his tablet and showed it to the crowd. "Sarah Miller, formerly Captain Sarah Rodriguez, United States Army. 15 years of service, over 300 successful rescue missions, decorated for valor under fire. One of the most skilled helicopter pilots in the mountain rescue community." The crowd murmured with surprise and admiration. Sarah closed her eyes, knowing what was coming next. "But," Robert continued, 3 years ago, Captain Rodriguez was involved in a fatal crash during a medical evacuation mission in Colorado. 2 people died, her co-pilot and the patient they were trying to save. The admiration in the crowd shifted to shock and uncertainty. Sarah opened her eyes and saw people looking at her differently now, questions and concerns replacing the earlier enthusiasm. After the crash, Robert went on, Rodriguez left the military and disappeared. Until today, no one in the aviation community knew where she had gone. Linda Chen stepped forward, looking at her brother with anger. "Robert, what are you doing? Why are you trying to hurt her?" "I'm not trying to hurt anyone," Robert replied. "I'm trying to understand why someone with Rodriguez's skills abandoned her career and went into hiding. The aviation community has been wondering about it for years." Sarah finally found her voice. "I didn't abandon anything. I made a mistake that cost people their lives, and I decided I couldn't risk making that mistake again." "What kind of mistake?" someone in the crowd asked. Sarah looked around at the faces watching her, neighbors, customers, people she had served coffee to every morning for months. They deserved to know the truth. "I flew in conditions that were too dangerous," she said. "The weather was deteriorating rapidly, and I should have turned back. But the patient was critical, and I thought I could make it through. I was wrong." "What happened?" Tom asked gently. "We hit severe turbulence about 10 minutes from the hospital. I lost control of the aircraft and crashed in a forest clearing. My co-pilot, Lieutenant Danny Martinez, was killed on impact. The patient died from his injuries before rescue teams could reach us." The crowd was silent now, absorbing the weight of her words. "The investigation cleared me of fault," Sarah continued. "They said it was equipment failure combined with impossible weather conditions. But I knew better. I made the decision to continue the flight when I should have turned back, and people died because of my judgment." Robert lowered his tablet. "So you just quit? Gave up a distinguished career because of one accident?" "I didn't give up," Sarah said, her voice stronger now. "I made a choice. I decided that the risk of hurting more people wasn't worth continuing to fly." "But today you flew again," Linda pointed out. "What changed?" Sarah looked toward the mountains, where smoke was still visible from the contained wildfire. "Today, I was the only option available. The Johnson family would have died if no one went to get them." "And you saved them," Frank Morrison said firmly. "Whatever happened 3 years ago, you saved 4 lives today. That doesn't erase the 2 lives I lost." "No," Tom said quietly, "but it doesn't erase the 4 lives you saved either, or the 300 people you rescued before that." Robert put away his tablet and looked at Sarah with what might have been respect. "Captain Rodriguez, or Sarah Miller if you prefer, I came here expecting to write a story about a disgraced pilot hiding from her past. But after seeing what you did today, I think the real story is about someone who cared so much about doing the right thing that she was willing to sacrifice everything to avoid making another mistake." Sarah didn't respond immediately. She was thinking about the Johnson family, safe at home tonight, because she had found the courage to fly again. She was thinking about Danny Martinez and the patient who died in that Colorado forest. She was thinking about the choice between hiding from her abilities and using them to help people. "I don't want to be famous," she said finally. "I don't want interviews or articles or recognition. I just want to live quietly and maybe help people when I can." "Then that's what you'll do," Tom said firmly. "This is your home now, and we take care of our own." The crowd began to disperse, people returning to their homes and businesses with a new understanding of who Sarah Miller really was. Some looked at her with admiration, others with curiosity, a few with concern. But none of them looked at her the same way they had that morning. As the last of the neighbors walked away, Linda Chen approached Sarah. "I'm sorry about my brother," she said. "He means well, but he doesn't always think about how his stories affect people." It's okay, Sarah replied. The truth was going to come out eventually. What will you do now? Sarah looked at the cafe, at Tom, who was waiting patiently by the door, at the mountains where the smoke was finally beginning to clear. I guess I'll go back to serving coffee, she said. But maybe if someone really needs help, I'll be ready to do more than that. Chapter 7. A New Purpose. 2 weeks after the rescue, life in Pine Ridge had settled into a new normal. Sarah still worked at Miller's Cafe, still served coffee to the same regular customers, still lived in her small apartment above the hardware store. But everything was different now. People treated her with a respect that went beyond politeness. When she walked down Main Street, people nodded with genuine appreciation. When she took orders at the cafe, customers asked about her well-being rather than just placing their usual requests. The Johnson family had returned to town after staying with relatives during the fire cleanup. Mike and Carol made a point of stopping by the cafe every few days, and their children, Emma and Tyler, always waved enthusiastically when they saw Sarah. But the biggest change was in Sarah herself. For the first time in 3 years, she felt like she belonged somewhere. Not because she was hiding, but because she was known and accepted for who she really was. She was wiping down tables after the morning rush when the cafe door chimed. Sarah looked up to see Dave Martinez entering with a woman she didn't recognize. Middle-aged, professional-looking, wearing a uniform that suggested some kind of official capacity. "Morning, Sarah," Dave said. "This is Captain Jennifer Walsh from the State Emergency Management Agency. She'd like to talk to you about something." Sarah set down her cleaning cloth and approached the counter. "What can I do for you, Captain Walsh?" "I'll get straight to the point," Walsh said. "We've been reviewing the Henderson Valley rescue operation, and we're impressed with how you handled a difficult situation. We'd like to offer you a position." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "What kind of position?" "Part-time emergency response pilot. You'd remain here in Pine Ridge, continue your regular life, but be available for rescue operations when needed. The pay isn't much, but it would give you flight currency and provide this region with experienced helicopter rescue capability." Sarah glanced at Dave, who was watching her carefully. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure I'm ready for that." "What happened 2 weeks ago suggests you're more ready than you think," Walsh replied. "We've had 3 more emergency calls since then that could have used helicopter support. In each case, we had to wait hours for aircraft from other regions." "What if I make another mistake?" Walsh leaned forward slightly. "Sarah, I've read your service record. In 15 years of flying, you had 1 accident. That's an exceptional safety record in our business. And more importantly, you've demonstrated that you can still perform under pressure." Tom emerged from the kitchen, drying his hands on a towel. "Sorry to interrupt, but I couldn't help overhearing. Sarah, whatever you decide, you'll always have a job here at the cafe." Sarah appreciated the support, but she was still uncertain. "Captain Walsh, if I were to consider this, what would the requirements be?" "Recertification training, probably 2 weeks. Annual proficiency checks. You'd be on call for emergencies within a 50-mile radius. We estimate maybe 1 or 2 calls per month on average." "And if I can't handle a particular situation?" "Then you say no. No one expects you to fly in conditions you consider unsafe. The whole point is to have an experienced pilot who knows the difference between acceptable risk and unnecessary danger." Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking. She had been content serving coffee and living quietly, but the Henderson Valley rescue had awakened something in her. The feeling of being useful, of having skills that could save lives, of being who she was meant to be. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Of course, but don't think too long. Weather's turning cold, and winter rescue operations are the most challenging." After Walsh and Dave left, Sarah sat alone in the cafe, staring out the window at the mountains. Tom sat down across from her with 2 cups of coffee. Penny for your thoughts, he said. I'm scared, Sarah admitted. What if I freeze up again? What if I can't handle the pressure? What if you can? Sarah smiled. That's what Dave said 2 weeks ago. Smart man. Sarah, I've watched you these past months. You're not someone who runs from responsibility. You're someone who takes it so seriously that you'd rather sacrifice your own happiness than risk hurting others. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's both. It shows you care deeply about doing the right thing. But it also means you're harder on yourself than you need to be. Sarah sipped her coffee, thinking about the conversation with Captain Walsh. Tom, what if I took the job but kept working here too? Part-time for both. I'd be honored to have Pine Ridge's official rescue pilot working in my cafe. Might be good for business. They both laughed, but Sarah was serious about the idea. She liked her life in Pine Ridge. She liked the routine, the regular customers, the sense of community. But she also missed the purpose that came with being a rescue pilot. Maybe she could have both. The next morning, Sarah called Captain Walsh and accepted the position. Within a week, she was enrolled in recertification training at the state aviation facility. The coursework was challenging: emergency procedures, weather interpretation, navigation systems, but it felt like coming home. Her flight instructor was a woman named Maria Santos, a former Coast Guard pilot with 20 years of experience. Your basic skills are solid, Maria told her after their first training flight, but you're overthinking everything. You need to trust your instincts. My instincts got people killed, Sarah replied. No, your instincts kept you alive for 15 years and saved hundreds of lives. One accident doesn't erase all of that. Over the course of 2 weeks, Sarah gradually regained her confidence. Each successful flight, each smooth landing, each properly executed emergency procedure reminded her that she was still capable of doing this job. On her final check ride, Maria presented her with a scenario similar to the Henderson Valley rescue: trapped hikers, deteriorating weather, challenging terrain. Sarah flew the mission flawlessly, making careful decisions about risk management while still accomplishing the objective. Congratulations, Maria said as they landed. You're officially qualified for emergency response operations. Sarah felt a surge of pride that she hadn't experienced in 3 years. She was a pilot again, officially and legally. More importantly, she was ready to help people who needed her skills. When she returned to Pine Ridge, the cafe was decorated with a banner that read, "Welcome home, Captain Miller." Tom had organized a small celebration with regular customers, and even Dave Martinez was there in his official capacity to present her with her new emergency services identification. "Speech," someone called out. Sarah looked around the room at the faces of people who had become her friends and neighbors. 3 years ago, she had come to Pine Ridge to hide from her past. Now she was ready to embrace both her past and her future. "I just want to say thank you," she began. "When I first came here, I was running away from who I used to be. You all helped me realize that I can't change what happened 3 years ago, but I can choose what happens next." She paused, looking at the Johnson family who had come to the celebration. "Emma Johnson asked me yesterday if I was going to keep flying helicopters. I told her yes, because sometimes people need help that only certain skills can provide. But I also told her that I'm still going to serve coffee at the cafe because community matters just as much as heroics." The room erupted in applause and cheers. Sarah felt tears in her eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. That night, as she walked home through the quiet streets of Pine Ridge, Sarah looked up at the stars and felt at peace for the first time in 3 years. She was still the woman who had lost people in a crash, but she was also the woman who had saved the Johnson family and who would be ready to help others when they needed her. Tomorrow would bring another day of coffee service and small-town life. But now it might also bring the sound of helicopter blades and the chance to make a difference in ways that really mattered. Sarah Miller had stopped hiding from her past. Instead, she had found a way to honor it while building a future worth living. Epilogue. 6 months later. The call came on a Tuesday morning in February, while Sarah was preparing the morning coffee service at Miller's Cafe. Snow was falling steadily outside, and the weather service was predicting a major winter storm. Her emergency pager buzzed with the familiar sound that meant someone, somewhere, needed help that only she could provide. Avalanche on Mountain Pass Road, the message read. 2 vehicles buried, unknown number of passengers, weather deteriorating rapidly. Sarah looked at Tom, who was already reaching for her emergency gear bag that they kept behind the counter. Go, he said simply. I'll handle the cafe. Sarah changed into her flight suit in the back office, her movements quick and efficient. 6 months of regular emergency calls had restored her confidence and sharpened her skills. She was no longer the frightened, rusty pilot who had reluctantly flown the Henderson Valley Rescue. She was Captain Sarah Miller, professional helicopter pilot, ready to do what she did best. The flight to the avalanche site was challenging but manageable. Heavy snow, strong winds, limited visibility, exactly the kind of conditions that once would have terrified her. Now they were simply factors to be managed and overcome. She found the buried vehicles using thermal imaging equipment and coordinated with ground rescue teams to extract 3 survivors from the snow. All of them were injured but alive, and all of them made it safely to the hospital because Sarah was there to provide emergency transport. When she landed back in Pine Ridge that afternoon, a small crowd had gathered at the airfield. Word of the rescue had spread through town, as it always did. But the reception was different now than it had been after her first rescue 6 months ago. People were proud of her, but they weren't surprised. This was what Sarah Miller did. She served coffee in the morning, flew rescue missions when needed, and then came back to serve more coffee. She was part of the community now, valued for all the different ways she contributed. Emma Johnson, now 9 years old, ran up to Sarah as she was securing the helicopter. Miss Sarah, did you save more people today? I helped save them, Sarah replied. But it took a whole team of people working together. When I grow up, I want to be a helicopter pilot like you. Sarah knelt down to Emma's level. That's a wonderful goal. But remember, being a pilot is just one way to help people. The most important thing is to find what you're good at and use it to make the world a little better. As the crowd dispersed and Sarah walked back toward town, she reflected on how much her life had changed. She still carried the weight of the people she couldn't save 3 years ago. She probably always would. But now she also carried the joy of the people she had saved since returning to flying. The old Sarah Miller had been defined by her failures. The new Sarah Miller was defined by her choices. The choice to face her fears, the choice to use her skills for good, the choice to be part of a community that valued her for who she really was. At Miller's Cafe, Tom had left a fresh pot of coffee and a note. For our pilot. The coffee will stay warm until you get back. The town will too. Sarah poured herself a cup and sat by the window, watching the snow fall on the quiet streets of Pine Ridge. Tomorrow, there would be more coffee to serve, more customers to greet, more ordinary moments in an ordinary small town. And maybe, if someone needed help that only she could provide, there would be another flight into the mountains, another chance to bring people home safely. Sarah Miller was exactly where she belonged, serving her community in all the ways that mattered. The quiet waitress had become the town's guardian angel, and everyone who knew her story understood that sometimes the most powerful heroes are the ones who never stop caring about serving others, whether that's coffee or life-saving rescues. She was no longer hiding from her past. She was using it to build a future where every day offered new opportunities to make a difference. And in the end, that was the only kind of heroism that really mattered. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We'd love to hear what inspired you the most. And where in the world are you watching from? Let us know below.